All right, we're off and running here at the Land and Development Conference. I'm Aaron. He's Adam. Thanks to First National for powering the podcast. Our guest today is a gentleman named Ryan Zizzo, who has a whole bunch of letters after his name, so I'm going to skip over that part. Founder and CEO of Mantle Developments. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. My pleasure to be here.
So we're here at the Land and Development Conference. It's near the end of the day. Adam and I spent the whole day talking about condos and land and the economics, development, and just the stresses that the system is facing as it relates to just economics and the uncertainty in the marketplace and costs and fees and all these other things. We've not talked about sustainability in real estate at all today. So I think that the way what I'm getting
confession to start off with here.
Yeah, which is why I'm glad we're having you on with this diversity of topics, right? So
that
you
would
can
have been a big miss if we didn't talk sustainability.
So Ryan, thanks for joining.
Yeah, my pleasure.
As we always like to, let's start with just background. How did you end up being the founder and CEO of Mantle Developments?
Yeah, so I'm a structural engineer by training. Went to school to figure out how to put up buildings. I realized that we're actually really good at putting up buildings. We don't need a ton of innovation in that space, but I realized what we're not good at is making them environmentally friendly. And there was a much too big of an environmental impact in the way that we've been building our cities in the past. So focused on green buildings in my master's, then started working for a large engineering firm that was doing LEED certifications across the country. After 8 years of that, I moved to Helsinki, Finland, and I tell people I saw the future because they're so far ahead of us in the Nordics in terms of sustainability and green buildings. And they were really laser focused on low carbon material selection, mass timber, lower carbon concrete and steel, things that were not really on the radar 15 years ago in Canada. And I saw that that was a huge driver and impact for change going forward and tied in very nicely with my structural engineering background. So after 3 years in Finland, I came back to Canada and founded my own consultancy focused on low carbon materials and innovation in the construction sector. And it's been a wild ride, but I see a lot of growth in this area and really excited to continue and help developers and municipalities and government policy makers drive greener and more resilient and future-proof buildings.
We've talked about Europe before on this podcast as being the leader of green initiatives. Aaron and I look at it through a lens of finance, like the way finance is structured there heavily incentivizes, or both a carrot and a stick in terms of green building. But when you say they're way ahead of us, was that in terms of the actual, because your background would be a little different, is that the actual built form, or are you referring more to the regulatory framework and the financing framework?
I mean, all of the above, really. I think that, if people have asked me, why do you think Europe is so different from North America in that sense? I think really they have a much broader view of what they're valuing when they're making decisions. I think in North America, for whatever reason, we make decisions based on short-term reducing costs or more profit in the short term, but it's always in the short term. Whereas I think the experience of, Europe obviously has a lot longer history. I think that they just they think about things in a longer time scale than we do, I think, and they make decisions based on what they know to be for the better, for what's in their interest in the long term. Whereas, even I've seen it had examples where like sustainability regulations might be rolled back, but a lot of developers in Europe, they say, well, we know it's the right thing to do. We're going to keep doing it. And I think we don't have that to the same level here. So I think that's a big thing that we need to change, and we need to mature in our timelines and think about what's good for us in the long term, not just what's good for us in the short term.
Maybe you just answered it, but how do you define sustainability?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's the UN definition everyone quotes. How to not take things from future generations, basically, or how to live within your means. And I think that's right. But sustainability is one piece, and we had a little bit of a preamble before we started recording here. We were talking about energy and ESG and sustainability and where all these things come together. And I often, I don't even talk about any of those things. Typically, I talk about carbon and climate resilience, right? Sorry, I'm hitting the table. I'm probably screwing up the audio here. I get passionate when I talk about it.
Good.
So I like to say, when people say energy, I like to say, do you mean carbon? Because maybe you don't. Maybe you're talking about costs of running your building. That's one thing. But if you're talking about the environmental impact, we shouldn't really be talking about energy. We should be talking about carbon, right? Or emissions, more precisely. So I'm always trying to bring it back to climate change, to carbon emissions, methane emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in general, and climate resilience. I don't think there's any future for construction in which we're not very low carbon, very low emission, and more resilient, because every year we're getting more and more impacts. I mean, I was up in Northern Ontario, or in the cottage country a few days ago, and there was smoke everywhere in the sky. I've only seen that twice before in my whole life. One was 2 years ago, and one was now. That's something that never happened, has happened twice in the past 3 years now. So the climate is changing. Like, if people say it's not, I mean, that's just not the reality, right? So we need to come up with ways to build our buildings in a way that not only is less damaging to climate impacts, but ideally as a solution to climate impacts. And that's what gets me excited about bio-based materials like mass timber, low carbon, concretes, and, there are innovative approaches to traditional, quote unquote, traditional materials like concrete and steel, where we can make them carbon neutral, and ideally carbon storing in the future by creating these materials out of atmospheric carbon. And that's really what the future of construction is.
Before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of how we get it done,
I was going to ask, what's carbon?
Yeah. Han Solo is encased in it, right? No,
that's carbonite.
Okay.
Come on, guys. Your Star Wars references.
Mantle Developments.
Yeah.
Aaron always loves to know the genealogy of names. How'd you get that name? It's got to be a good story.
So mantle is actually the majority of the Earth, right? The Earth is made up of the crust, which is superficial and thin, which I don't love that. The core, which is molten and solid. It's kind of cool, but the mantle is everything in between, right? If you had to say the Earth is one thing, it's the mantle. So I think that that's a cool name. I also think that it's where you put things that you're proud of on top of your fireplace. If I used to put my birthday cards on the mantle.
First line.
Yeah. So there's a few, and then there's also the mantle of responsibility that people gain when they know something and they need to act on it. That's a mantle of responsibility. So I think all three of those are interesting. All of them resonated with me. The developments, I had an idea that we could co-brand buildings as a developer developments, XYZ developer, and also a Mantle Developments. It's a future development. Unfortunately, over the past 4 years, it's just led to confusion in the market. Everyone thinks we're actually developers, so we're actually changing our name in a couple of weeks to Mantle Climate. So haven't gone public with that, but yeah.
There you go. You just did.
We're going to be Mantle Climate soon. But that's where the name comes from.
Keeping the mantle, though. That's
the mantle.
That's good.
I knew you'd have a good answer. I like that.
So let's just talk about, what do you mean by low carbon steel, low carbon concrete? What is that?
Yeah. So there's carbon emissions with the manufacture of the materials that we're using, right? Concrete doesn't just show up at a building site. We need to have raw material extracted, limestone and other materials that gets shipped to a production facility. We create cement, which has a huge carbon emission associated with making cement because there's energy that goes into it. There's chemical reactions that happen. Then it goes into a mixer. The mixer drives to site. All of those processes have emissions associated with them, right? But when we're doing traditional carbon accounting of construction projects, we just start the emission counter when you turn on the lights and the heating for the first time. There's a huge amount of emissions that goes into getting a building there before you turn on the heating and the lights, right? And just as an industry, we're only starting to wake up to that. And that's what we call embodied emissions or embodied carbon. That's the carbon it takes to get something to where it is, basically. And we also can go on to the future life cycle phases of a building, like deconstruction and recycling. All of those have emissions as well. So people often talk about cradle to grave of a whole building and the embodied carbon with that. But that's what that concept is. But so what we do is help both developers, policymakers, and manufacturers of these materials really understand their embodied carbon impact, explaining it to them, kind of breaking it down, but also helping them with quantifying it, with reducing it, with reporting it, putting it in their annual reports. And it's really exciting because there's so much low-hanging fruit in this area. Like, most people haven't even heard of the idea.
Well, if I'm a concrete manufacturer, if that's the right terminology, why do I care?
Well, because you have a value proposition to your clients if you are a lower carbon and you're lower.
Well, can I charge more?
Well, you're going to be, you potentially can charge more in some, depending on the market or the amount.
Or I just get less. I get less
penalized. Less.
Yeah, I get less
side.
orders.
Yeah, exactly. Or less regulatory burden on you, right? Because you're going to have to start paying a carbon tax, right? And maybe
that's a dirty word. Don't go there.
Maybe that got removed, in the immediate term. But do we really think there's a world in 20 or 30 years where we're not going to be having some kind of a incentive for lower carbon products? That's where we're going.
I'm supportive of a carbon tax. That wasn't my point. I'm just trying to talk through the logic of how this works. And I guess if I'm a developer who is raising money through a fund and I'm attracting European investment, I want to make sure I can say I'm sourcing my concrete from a low carbon provider. And that's where I think the rubber hits the road. That the capital is saying, I want to make sure that all the way through the investment chain that my money is being used towards as close to a carbon neutral or a decarbonized process.
Exactly. And there's policy that is being developed and rolled out across the globe on this. The government of Canada has a low carbon concrete requirement for all federal government projects. The concrete has to be 10% below industry average. So if you're building for the government of Canada, you need to understand the carbon footprint of your concrete and compare it against the average of value in your region, in your province, and show that it's 10% below, or the government won't buy the concrete from you. So we're starting to see this coming more and more. Other, municipalities are rolling this out. California's had something called Buy Clean California since 2017, I think.
Does it make the concrete more expensive? I'm using concrete. I mean, we could talk about other materials.
By the pound, ignoring externalities.
Well, and I mean, again,
it depends on how deep your carbon reduction is. It depends on your region. In Ontario, you can get from 10 to 30% reduction in your carbon of your concrete for no cost or performance impact. So if you're going to 50%, 60% reductions, then you start to
is that the lowest
changes.
You can.
I think 50% is the most I've seen right now, but it will take longer for the concrete to cure and to harden, and it will have a little bit more a cost there. But you can get 10, 20, 30% without
we're looking very hard.
I wonder why the government didn't push it further then beyond just a 10% requirement.
Well, the government of Canada builds in the far north. They build all across the country. They have different, size projects. So they wanted to start with something that was very easily achievable.
Gotcha.
And then start ratcheting it up over time.
Okay.
Yeah. And just quickly to talk about another example, steel. One of our clients is a steel fabricator based in St. Catharines. They hired us to help look at the carbon footprint of their product, and they use less material than their competitors. So they thought, because we use less materials, it's a better environmental story. But when we actually dug into where they were getting their steel from, it was from very inefficient producers that used coal and had old plants, and it was just not efficient. We said, hey, let's try to find you a more efficient plant nearby that uses scrap metal and uses electricity to make the energy, or to make the steel, and it was half the carbon footprint at the same price. But no one had ever looked at that metric. No one had been optimizing for carbon.
So literally just familiarity, just raising it, just awareness.
Exactly.
While we're on it, let's just go to wood too. So a lot of our housing, a lot of our real estate is built with built with wood. So how does that play itself into this formula?
So a lot of housing but it's all most of that is low density or single family homes. But we're starting to see a renaissance in wood for larger buildings, right? So this is called mass timber, CLT,
but even the non-mass timber. Sorry, I want to get there next. But is there not a way to decarbonize that? Like, isn't there you got to make sure that you're replanting the wood that you use? Like, how does that?
Yes,
work?
Certified wood. That's right. We want to make sure we're getting wood from certified forests. Canada has very good forest management practices in general. So wood from Canada is going to be pretty good in terms of their sustainability, and it has to be replanted, and it has to have habitat protections and things like that. But there are there are additional things that happen when you procure from a certified forest. So that's definitely something that, and again, just decarbonizing the supply chain, right? Like, how is wood being transported? Like, can we change that to a biofuel, or can we change it instead of diesel to run the trucks, right? Or can we use electric vehicles, right? All the equipment that we're using during the harvesting, can that be decarbonized? So even if it's not the material itself, it's about the supply chain and how we're getting that material, how we're getting it to the site, how we're installing it on the site, what the end of life is, how we recycle it. Like, all of these things need to be decarbonized, right? So, and then in terms of mass timber, I mean, we're seeing the Ontario Building Code was recently updated to allow for 18 stories mass timber now. 2 weeks ago, I was touring the new mass timber building at the University of Toronto. It's called Academic Wood Tower, being built by Pomerleau. and it's going to be, I think it's 16 stories, I believe, and it'll be the tallest wood building in Canada. There's an 18-story one in BC, but it's a shorter.
UBC, I think.
Yeah,
that's
but it's
right?
shorter
Yeah.
floor to ceiling height. So the one at U of T will actually be taller, even though it's less stories. But I mean, again, I think that's future of construction. I mean, we're always going to use concrete and steel, but we're going to have much more wood in our cities in the future. And I think, you know, when I see that wood, I see that's atmospheric carbon that was sucked out of the atmosphere by a tree. We had all these amazing co-benefits like habitat creation, water, you know, purification, soil erosion prevention. There's so many benefits to using more bio-based materials. Obviously, that's going to be paired with steel and concrete, but you know, I'm not saying we should not use steel and concrete, but we need to think about the best use of these materials, and not just defaulting on what we've always done in the past.
Are the costs coming down?
The costs are coming down. With mass timber specifically, there's a lot. It's a shorter construction cycle because it comes to site as a prefabricated element, like a Lego block, and you just put it up, right? So like large scale construction projects can be, I've heard, up to a year or shorter if in mass timber. So when you take into account that shorter schedule, then that has a real impact. If you're just comparing the upfront cost to purchase the material, I've heard, you know, mass timber is mostly going to be more expensive. But again, we need to think longer term. We need to think about holistically about the whole project. And there's a lot of other benefits. Also, mass timber is lighter. So you have significantly less foundation requirements required. So you spend a lot less money on your foundations when you go mass timber.
So as a building material, if you ignore the carbon implications, just as a building material, there's advantages to it above and beyond.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Should we talk about your baby, Aaron?
Well, let's go to innovation.
Innovation,
that'll be part
okay,
of it.
then-
Yeah.
Okay.
What types of innovation are you seeing in the development space? If you are being approached saying, you know, developer A is looking for guidance on what they should be doing and future-proofing their business, what are you telling them?
Yeah, I mean, it's low carbon materials, right? So we already talked about that. Low carbon steel, concrete, wood. And then it's cost and speed, right? So how can we achieve these, you know, create these buildings in a way that's faster and more replicable? It's modular, right? It's modular housing. It's shifting from every building being a totally unique design, you know, to creating our buildings on assembly lines. Right. And then we still have to add, you know, we're going to add some individual things to make them look different. And
The aesthetic.
aesthetic isn't going to be assembly line, but the structural, you know, we can do that on an assembly line. We can create columns that are from the assembly line, or, you know, beams, and we're not doing that at all. Every building I've worked on in my past 20-year career, it's a totally unique thing with a totally different set of team members and, you know, different requirements. And we need to streamline all of that. We need to make, you know, the federal government is starting that with the National Housing Catalog that they've developed with Infrastructure Canada and NRC. But we just need to really think about creating housing as a product on an assembly line like others. And modular is a big way to do that. Modular actually has a lot of other co-benefits, including allowing a broader type of person to work in the construction industry. If you go to a construction site, it's mostly big, strong guys. I mean, sorry to generalize, but that's typically the type of people, you know, younger, stronger, because it's a physical job. And if you go to a modular plant, you have a much higher proportion of different body types, not as, you know, maybe some petite people are working there. Maybe it's, you know, older people, maybe it's more women, you know, just a much broader spectrum of society can work in a modular plant because there's equipment that can help them. There's lift assist things, you know, there's trucks that they can use. Also, you can decarbonize a modular factory much more than you can decarbonize, or much easier than it would be to decarbonize a construction site, right? If you're building within a factory, we can put solar panels on the roof and we can put heat pumps on and we can find ways to decarbonize that process. Whereas if we're on the site, you're using diesel and it's going to be dirtier. So there's a lot of benefits from modular that I think we're only really starting to understand.
Are you excited about the financing changes around modular? It should be easier to finance going forward. As one of the hindrances to it, of course, was how do you finance it? Because that's how most of this is built. And I guess the other problem that Aaron's gone on about before, and I'll rehash for him, set him up for this one, is I guess production capacity is still an issue that needs to be more developed as demand ratchets up. Does that resonate as true?
Well, what in my dealings with the industry, I've heard that they don't have a long-term consistent supply confirmed, and that's the issues, right? So I've researched examples in Germany where the government says we're taking all your capacity for the next 3 years or 5 years, right? It's not on a project basis, but they said you build it, we're going to figure out a project for it to go into, right? I think we need more thinking like that about the government, setting up the conditions for this housing boom that we need to have. Part of it is ensuring that those plants can operate at full capacity. And another thing I've heard in the mass timber space is because of all these projects are different, they can't just run full out because they have to do this specialty order for these people and then another specialty order for the other people, and then there's a delay and it screws up the whole schedule for everyone, right? So again,
it gets built but then it's not ready on site, like that kind of a delay.
Yeah, and it's all just on time delivery, right? So we've become so efficient in a lot of these things that there's no room for there's no buffer for an error, right? And when there is an error, it kind of screws up 5 projects because they're all in queue and they can't send the stuff anywhere. So, but I think one of the solutions to that, as I said, is having government ask for a long-term supply from a factory, and then setting the use of that type of a member as a design requirement for the new projects they're doing, right? Instead of the other way around. Instead of the design driving what we're going to make and build, let's just make and build it and tell the designs, hey, you got to find a way to use this material, right? It should be doable. It doesn't sound like rocket science. It's just we've done these things in a certain way for so long, and there's so much inertia in the system. It's difficult to change that.
Real estate loves looking backwards, not so much forward.
Yeah.
And what Adam was referring to is we had Nadine LeBlanc on, who's a senior vice president of policy from CMHC. And we were discussing that they've got a pilot project and they've now are effectively launching a modular mortgage insurance program, which allows the developer and I guess their manufacturing partner to get up to 85, 90, 95% financing for that project. And of course, remember the challenge, of course, is that traditional financing for typical construction is developer procures it, gets it delivered, gets it installed, and then lender will then fund as a sort of reimbursement for the work that's done on site, right? It's like a cost of complete basis.
But it's small adjustable amounts.
Yeah, so once a month, I have a cost consultant goes and says, there was $500,000 of steel and concrete poured or installed, and so I pay $500,000 back to the developer for that. Modular, as you know, it's these giant chunky checks that get written as
at half the cost being
literally
before it comes on site.
On signing of construction is 25%. At procurement of the material, it's 20. So 50% of the hard costs have been spent before anything's even been put together, and then it's 25% upon completion, another 25% upon installation. So as a lender, it's really difficult for us to wrap our heads around paying 50% of the project cost to some guy in a manufacturing site where I've got no security. And so that's why it's never happened. That is one of the biggest impediments to the modular industry taking off, is that the financing. And so if you wanted to build a modular project without government assistance and really just do it privately, you basically had to do it with cash.
Right.
You had to do it without financing. Until you got it built, and then once it's built, you could get a typical, CMHC insured mortgage if you're building apartment buildings. And so this new program that literally is just launching now allows the construction to have CMHC insured financing up to a very healthy leverage point.
Using a bond, I think,
through bond, So the manufacturer has to have that contract with the developer fully bonded, and that way we get comfort that there's an insurance that in the event that the contract isn't upheld, the insurance comes in and completes the project. So all of a sudden now there is a financing. So if you're a private developer and you've got a site and you want to go and build, that you're looking for a creative, more sort of sustainable ways of building, there's now this CMHC insured program. The challenge now, I think, is I hope as we're announcing this, right, sort of today and over the next couple of months, you get all these developers go, oh crap, I've got this great site. I'm building a 12-plex, I'm building a 20-plex, I'm building 50 units, whatever it may be. I'm going to go modular. We've got 4 manufacturers in the country that really have the capacity to kind of do this stuff. They will get full immediately.
Yeah.
Right.
There'll be more. There'll be more.
Yeah, that's the thing, right?
That's how the market works.
These are growing pains, I think.
Yeah.
More
So
than
anyway,
anything
if you're out there and you want to be a modular manufacturer, now's the time.
This is the start of the
pull the trigger. Do it. I'm telling you now.
Definitely.
Over the next 5 to 10 years, how much closer will we get to Europe, do you think? It sounds like we're on the cusp of a lot of big leaps forward in this category that's been slower to evolve. What do you see happening over the kind of 5 or 10 year time horizon? Are we going to catch up, or at least get closer? What's your vision on or belief in Canada's ability to step up in this regards?
Yeah, it's difficult because I see a lot of great programs and great progress, like what the one you just said with CMHC. The municipal governments are developing lower carbon policies for construction. There's just a lot of actors, so I can never say we're doing well or we're not doing well, because there's always people in both categories, right? I mean, provincially in Ontario today, Bill 17 was passed, right? So that basically says municipalities can no longer require anything more than the Ontario Building Code and for their buildings. For the past 20 years, my whole career, we've had something called green development standards that municipalities have said, in addition to the Ontario Building Code, we have our own set of municipal standards for things like reducing stormwater, so reducing flooding, right? Having renewable energy generation, having carbon caps on our developments, making EV rough-ins standard, having trees on the lots, none of these things are in the Ontario Building Code, but I think we all want those in our buildings, right? So it's difficult to see how that's all going to shake out. I mean, maybe we're going to have legal challenges on this. Even if the municipal standards do get thrown out and don't come back, I think the industry as a whole needs to start working together to show what green buildings look like, right? I think one of the big problems with green development standards was every municipality had their own, right? But there was a patchwork of regulation, which is very inefficient. Actually, one of the first projects I worked on out of school was part of the Spadina subway extension. It was a new subway station that was on or under Steeles Avenue. So the south part of it was in Toronto, the north part of it was in Mississauga. We had different requirements we had to put to the different parts of the building. So very inefficient. So I have firsthand knowledge with the patchwork that is not good. But I don't think the way to fix that is to just say no municipalities can have any green building standards.
You think it's I mean, I hate to invoke his name, but you think it's kind of like a Trumpian type of approach? Like he's pegging the starting point of the negotiation, saying we're going to start at my level. And to be fair, let's have an honest conversation about this. And I agree, all those things that you listed are important and meaningful. But if we all had to collectively sit here and go, what are the biggest challenges and what are the biggest impediments to a lot of the affordability challenges we have across the country, particularly in Toronto, Vancouver, like the largest culprit is the municipalities, and the length of time it takes for approvals, the challenges you have of constant appeals, and we've had developers sit here and talk about an 8-month delay in their project because of some environmental study that they had to do. Now, perhaps there was legitimacy to it, but the developer is saying at the end of the day, it ended up being nothing, but lost me 8 months. It lost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the tenants that were going to live in that building had to wait an extra 8 months. You multiply that across the hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of projects across the country. Mm-hmm. Like there is a lot of delay as a result of municipality. It's waste. Like it is municipality waste, right? And I'm not saying again that it's bad, but I think maybe the Ford government is saying, and I didn't even vote for him, but I think he's kind of saying, okay, listen, we gotta clean this up,
right? And
here's where I'm starting. Like it feels positive.
We definitely need.
It feels positive to me.
The system is definitely broken.
Yeah.
So like I'm starting from there as well. We need new ideas, but I think just getting rid of all of the municipal leadership on this file is not the answer. I think we need more leadership and more innovation at the provincial level.
Do you think the developers
If the Ontario Building Code had sustainability requirements in them, then we would all be doing the same thing, right? Yeah. But it's the municipalities have been filling a void of leadership on this issue. And that's one of the things that have gotten us into this issue. Also, building sustainable, it's a little bit more cost up front, like 2% maybe, and it's much lower cost over the life of the building, right? Yeah. Your energy bills are lower. You're not replacing the flood in your basement. You're not ripping out to put in an EV charger. It's all there already, right? So this is about making higher quality buildings up front. And what the current proposal is from the provinces, we're only allowing the cheapest possible building, and that's it. Right? I don't think that's the way forward. So, but we'll see what happens. I think the private industry has a big role to play here to say we don't want to only build to the Ontario.
Well, that was where I was going to go. I mean, I know, and I'm sure there are bad actors, but I can tell you, basically anybody that we've ever had on this podcast who are developers, like they're building it because it's the right thing to build. It's the right thing to do. It's for the community. Like they all have that sense and that pride of what they build. They're not just going to go and slap the crappiest, most energy inefficient building because now they can, right? They're still going to do the right thing, but hopefully it happens much quicker, which is really part of the benefit.
Green
right?
development standards, that's a very small part of my business. I'm not saying this because it's for my business. What we do most of our work is in voluntary green building standards, like LEED, like zero carbon building standard, like Envision. There's a whole network of voluntary sustainability, green building, zero carbon standards that people are following. Developers want that. They value that. So
their investors
honestly
want it, right?
Yeah,
There's a lot of people that can't get money unless they're doing this.
So I don't think
stuff.
this is going to shift a lot, except for
the fringes. There will be the bad actors, and there always are, and that's probably where there's the challenge, right?
And the future's, there's no future in which low carbon construction is not going to be a priority, right? So I always say maybe we go 2 steps in one direction, 1 step back, but we're still making progress in one direction. So I think, the future is low carbon, resilient construction, period, right? Or we're not going to have a livable society. So let's figure out a way to get there together, and that we're working together and not just fighting and putting in a policy one year and cancel it the next, but let's think about what we want the future to look like and start working towards that together.
Is jaded positivity your outlook? Then I think was my takeaway from that.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
I'll take it. That concludes the podcast here today at the Land Development Conference. We want to thank the Real Estate Forums for hosting and putting on such a great event. First National for powering the podcast. Most of all, though, our guest, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It was informative. The passion comes through. The jaded positivity comes through.
My pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to speak to you guys. Thanks for the opportunity.